Good afternoon. My name is Daniele Struppa. I am the president of Chapman University, a nationally ranked institution just about an hour south of here in Orange County. Of course, an hour depending on when you drive. I'm here today with two very impressive speakers, and I'm going to be moderating a dialogue between Dr. Quentin McAndrew and Dr. Kelly Murphy-Healy. So let me tell you a little bit about them, and then we're going to get started. So Dr. Healy has really, here on my left, a really multiform background. She's currently the president of the Milken Center for the Advancement of the American Dream. She was, like me, a president of a college, Babson College, for 6 years. So we share that kinship among presidents. Babson College is one of the major business schools in the nation, and actually probably the #1 in entrepreneurship. She has also served as lieutenant governor in the state of Massachusetts, and among her many credits there, she was a key part of the creation of the Healthcare Reform Act. And she has a very distinguished academic background. She got an AB in government from Harvard, as well as a PhD in political sciences from Trinity College in Dublin. Dr. McAndrew is a strategist for Coursera, and in that position, she establishes and works to create partnership to really with universities to look at what the future of higher education is. So the perfect person for this particular panel. Before working for Coursera, she was actually assistant vice provost at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and the actual title was Executive Director for Academic and Learning Innovation and Strategic Transformation. She's been teaching a business writing course to 127,000 global learners. And when I read the statistic, I felt a little embarrassed because this semester I taught a math class to 5 students. So then I did 127,000 divided by 5, and I had to be alive for 25,400 semesters in order to match the kind of impact that my friend here has had. She holds a bachelor and a master's degree from Stanford and a PhD from University of Colorado Boulder, all of them in English. So now what I'd like to start is actually by asking them the question of the title of today. So is higher education really worth it? And maybe we can start with you, Kelly.
So, well, first of all, thank you, Danielle, for that very kind introduction. If I had to answer the question with one word, I would say yes. The answer is yes. If you look at the statistics over the course of your lifetime, if you've graduated from college, and especially if you've done graduate work, you're going to make hundreds of thousands, if not million plus dollars more than if you didn't. But in that answer, a lot is concealed. And so as a college president, you get to dig down a little bit into what is the return on investment in a college education. And there was a wonderful moment for me as Babson president where Money Magazine started a new sort of rating system, and it was on return on investment. And so you're very excited about these all the time. You want to know what it is. And they sent out a photographer, so I thought we were going to do well. So I was very excited about it. And I'm looking around, and it turns out that we ended up being the #1 college for return on investment in the country. Now, how did I feel about the company we were keeping? Well, next was something like the Colorado School of Mining, and next was the Merchant Marine Academy in Massachusetts. And so we began this sort of journey into saying, okay, what actually is valuable in a college education? And certainly how much money you make after you graduate is one measure, and then there are other measures. And if you dig into the data, what you find is that there are certain majors, certain concentrations that you can study that are going to make much more money for you, obviously, than others. And I think everyone always talks about philosophy graduates and liberal arts graduates not being paid well, and others being paid much better. Unfortunately, that's statistically true. So if you are an engineer or a computer scientist, or if you're a business major like those at Babson, your lifetime earnings are going to be probably $1 million more than if you were a liberal arts major or a communications major, et cetera. So there's no good one answer to this question, and I'm happy to dig in a little bit more if a little bit later. But just to start off, let's say that it's not a good question because all colleges are not the same. They don't all teach the same things, and what I'm finding fascinating and what I'm excited to talk with you about later on is that there are actually 16% of high school graduates, 23% of people who have some college, and 28% of people with associate degrees who actually make more money than half of all college graduates. So some people have hacked the system. Right. They can do it with less education, and so it's not always true for everyone that more education is better.
Quentin.
The short answer is, just like Kerry said, yes, of course, a college degree is still worth it. I mean, we know that in the United States, for instance, your income differential with a college degree is 68% higher than if you don't have one. I think the question, first of all, I got to plant a flag for English majors everywhere. I have 3 English degrees. So if I start bad-mouthing the humanities, I would not be a very honest person. I believe in the humanities, and I believe in the totalizing endeavor of education, and it should not just be reduced to income. But in a world where the cost of higher education is growing and students are coming out of college saddled with debt that prevents them from starting their lives and living their lives the way they should, we are selling our students short. We are not giving them the promise of a full education. And I think embedded in your question, I would take it a different direction, is who are we creating college degrees for? The very act of going to a campus almost anywhere is in and of itself an act of privilege, an act of exclusion, an act that shuts down opportunity. So how can we use this world that we live in right now with a bunch of different micro-credentials? Kerry's a big leader in that space, different pathways into degrees and lower cost degrees to create opportunity for a great sized market that we are not reaching yet. And that, to me, is our mission, is to change the world by making education accessible.
I want to follow up with something that's stimulated from your comment on the ROI. So the idea about the ROI is based on the fact that the purpose of higher education is to learn and therefore to acquire more skills for a world of work. Now, I've been a president for 6 years and a provost for 10 before that. So I'm going to provoke you with something that may be controversial. But I think that many students, not all of them, many students and many parents really go to college or send their kids to college for a different purpose. And a different purpose is for them to become adults. So college is the adult version of kindergarten. You don't go to kindergarten to learn a lot of stuff. You go to learn how to play with other kids in sandbox. And I found that many kids go to college for the same reason. They're trying to learn how to act in a social context. And then when they don't pay attention, we teach them something. But to me, that's the only reason why we can explain why universities spend so much money in climbing walls and swimming pools and the Greek system and the social clubs. If you were about learning math, you wouldn't spend any of that. So what am I going wrong with this analysis?
So I actually do think that there is this wonderful blossoming of the individual during the period of time that they are generally in college. So if you're a traditional student between 18 and 22, you can come in incredibly sheltered, inept, not knowledgeable about just about anything, and emerge this incredibly, functional, masterful, maybe overconfident, person who is going to go out and get their first job and really build something. And so that's exciting. And as a former college president, one of the most satisfying things to me was to watch students go along that trajectory of coming in as sort of malleable and coming out as individuals that really have a mission in life. And so that was exciting to me. And I think it's worth the money if you have it. But to your point about privilege, that's a very privileged thing to do, to be, sort of have your have your nature molded and coddled for 4 years while you get it together and occasionally pick up some knowledge. And I would actually say that the reason why there are so many recreational facilities and that campuses have become so beautiful, over the last 20 to 30 years, and driving the higher cost of education, I might add, is because of the availability of financial aid. Yeah. And the declining number of students that are coming into that college pipeline. Just demographically, there are fewer students available, and so there was a feeding frenzy, over the course of the last 10 years for the remaining students. And in order to do that, you both, responded to concerns in the greater public that you weren't admitting enough students who were, who had need. So you wanted to create scholarships or worse yet, loan programs that would allow people to come and participate in this very privileged activity. And at the same time, you wanted to make sure that your campus was the best campus. Right? Because how are you going to compete with that campus over there if they just put in the athletic facility, or if they have, some specialty that the others don't, or that others have and you don't? So you really needed to get into this arms race with other colleges in order to, chase this diminishing resource of 18 to 22-year-old students who could pay full freight. And so I think that there's a reason why this has happened. I think it's a bad reason, and it's very important right now that we stop, take a look at what college has become, and for some people, that is going to be perfect. That is going to be a perfect experience, and they will be able to afford it, and that's fine. But for all of the people who went into it blindly, thinking that a college education is the only thing that can get them the American dream or get them to a good paying job, we have to now be honest and say, no, there are actually other pathways to go, and that you need to make that information available to people. It can't be a mystery. If you don't want to go to college, how do you get to success?
Thank you. Okay.
So in terms of totalizing the total human in college, my daughter just graduated from the University of Colorado Boulder, and she rented a mechanical bull for her graduation party. So I feel like I like to say she made the most of her education in every aspect. But I agree with your assessment. The buffalo-shaped pool at Boulder and the climbing wall, it is an arms race for students, and it is the only way that you can recruit new students to your university, because universities are more and more reliant on tuition dollars coming from a state-funded institution. The total budget of the University of Colorado that comes from the state is 2.5% of the total operating budget. It's no longer a societal good to send your children to college, and so there's increasing pressure on tuition dollars to fund the campus experience, the professoriate that's creating jobs in the community, and to be over-reliant on tuition. So we also have a really rock and a hard place in a lot of our institutions where we can't drop tuition for too many students. You alluded to this, Kerry, because we have to cover our costs, and the state doesn't cover them anymore. So how do we address that? And then again, how do we address this idea that so many students leave undergraduate education and drop out with nothing? To me, that's criminal. That you could be a junior in status at a university and decide to leave. Maybe it's a life event, a trauma, and you have nothing. We ought to be staging education so that students have not just multiple entry points, but multiple exit points that get them into the job market and help them change their lives.
It's kind of interesting you both mentioned this arms race, and obviously as a president, and I experience it every day. But the thing that I find interesting is that you win or lose the arms race on the beauty of the campus, not on the quality of the education you provide. And I have 4 children, and so I also know how they decide where they want to go, and that the driver is not what as an academic I'd like. I mean, I grew up as an academic all my life. I'm a mathematician. I think that is nothing more exciting than math. But no parent has ever asked me, how good is the math department? How good are the math teachers here? But they want to see the pool. We don't have a buffalo-shaped pool, I have to say. Now I'm jealous, so we have to fix that. But one of the things that you kind of brought up, and kind of a natural segue, is is there a role for some kind, for a different way of doing education, something that would join the values of the liberal arts? We all are liberal arts people, government, political science, English, mathematics, but they would join it, for example, with more vocational training. That seems to me to address a little bit one of the comments about multiple exit points. Could you say something about that?
Yes, absolutely. I don't think that it is this hard choice or a binary choice between liberal arts or some sort of vocational education. I think that liberal arts institutions, if they're going to remain relevant, are going to have to start thinking about how do we provide a certain amount of what would have been considered either technical or business education, programming, other skills that are really skills that everyone expects you to have now when you come into the workforce. And it can't be looked on as a lesser pursuit. It actually has to be elevated so that you can get credit for it. You know, it's not like, oh, well, you can do that, but it doesn't count toward the degree. No, you actually have to say, these are things that people need to know now, today, in order to get jobs, in order to live life. And I would actually like to see things like financial literacy and other things, you know, taught, you know, so that period between 18 and 22, you really do gain the skills that you need to be successful for the rest of your life. So I would like to see some sort of hybrid model. And as you know, when we put together our collaboration at the Center for Advancing the American Dream with Coursera, we're offering a number of tech certificates. We're offering 200,000 scholarships where you can choose a tech certificate on the one side from Meta or Google or IBM, or et cetera. But on the other side, we have some liberal arts offerings that we require people to take if they're going to do this certificate and get the certification. So I think it's really important that we don't lose the liberal arts in the rush to the technical skills, but we also have to elevate those technical skills within colleges in order to make it work.
Thank you. I want to follow up briefly before we listen to Quentin. When you were president of the university, was it something you tried to do? Did you find challenges with the faculty? And she's smiling because I didn't tell her I was asking this question, but I know the answer because I'm a fellow president.
This is a leading question, but now that I'm no longer a college president, I can answer. But to this point, for example, we wanted to offer Python. Yeah, all the students wanted Python. And you know, the faculty said, quite reasonably, you know, in 5 years, it'll be something else. You know, this isn't why people go to college. You know, they need to learn lasting skills like mathematics and economics and things like that, things that will endure. But what I'm seeing now is that we're going to be constantly having to refresh our skills. It's just going to be part of what we do. And I love what Brandon Bustede at Kaplan has recently been talking about, this notion that work in the future will be a 4-day work week and that the 5th day will be reserved for upskilling and just, you know, continual education. And maybe it's not a whole day at first, but I bet ultimately all of us will need to constantly re-educate ourselves. And it's not like you can just go to college once and forget about it.
Thank you. Back to the vocational and mix.
So, yes, we need to have vocational education. I think Kerry really nailed it too. Public-private partnerships around teaching Python or the next tool is the way to go, because university professors are experts in their field. They created power electronics or high-level calculus, and you want them teaching those subjects. It's not worth your money to have them teach Python, but you can partner with companies like Google or Meta to provide just-in-time learning for students. And I also think, so far in our conversation, we've been concentrating on the 18 to 20-year-old, but the actual audience that Kerry and I work to reach are non-traditional learners. They're not 18 to 22-year-olds who are able to go to college like my daughters were able to, or like I was able to. They're people who have not had access to the ladder, to social enablement that higher education provides. And so how can we provide them with good careers that help fund their families, that help fund the next step of education? And I think industry certificates are one way that's proving out very strongly to be a vehicle for that. And then we have to build the back end on that that's based in higher education in a deeper degree, so that you don't just know Python, but you have life skills to make those transitions in your career. I mean, I've had 4 or 5 different careers, including being a mother, you know, as I went. So.
Well, and if I can jump on that point just briefly, if you look at the returns on investment for a college education, it's somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million less for women, depending on how far along they go in their education. So even a woman who has a PhD is going to make about $1 million less over the course of her lifetime than a man who has a PhD. And it's not just because of differential pay. People focus on that a lot. Women spend a lot of time out of the workforce. Yeah. They're mothers. And so it's going to be a really interesting question if, as people live longer, the working life for women will probably be longer than for men. That's my guess, because you know, women live longer anyway. We've taken time away. We are now getting into this idea that you can have multiple careers over the course of your life. And if there is the opportunity to reskill, you know, I can easily imagine most women wanting to work into their early 70s.
Just for the record, I don't want
No. I think I do.
Well, you are on the record because I want to talk a little bit about the cost of education, because when we talk about ROI, obviously the cost of education is part of it. I think you said something that I also believed before, that financial aid obviously has increased the cost of education. I think whenever there is a subsidy for a good, then the price of the good goes up. Like the mortgage deduction, I'm sure, made the price of housing higher. And everybody talks about how this is unsustainable, and we hear this every day. And now I'm preparing my next 5-year plan with my board. And of course, one of the concerns is how much can we raise tuition and where are we going to go? So where is this going to end? What do you think in terms of the cost of education, and how can it be? Can it be tamed, and if so, how?
To my view, we are going to have to be honest with ourselves about what we're buying. So if you can afford to buy a certificate, or if you can get a scholarship so that you can get that certificate for nothing, the value, and you can get a job that pays maybe $60,000 afterwards, so then that's the equivalent of a master's degree in most cases. What are you going to choose? The certificate that gives you for a couple $100 or even for free, or the master's degree that may leave you $100,000 or more in debt? So, and in some cases, much more than $100,000 in debt. And so I think people will begin to become rational when they have actual choices that employers like you all recognize, when that certificate is going to tell you as much about the abilities of that person, or a skills-based education will tell you as much about the abilities of that person as just a master's degree, then suddenly it's not going to be worth very much. And I think that there's going to be a moment when colleges and graduate schools in particular, who are cranking out these not very valuable MBAs in particular, you know, there's going to be a comeuppance, and people are going to be questioning whether or not they should go. And I already saw a decline in interest in the MBA during the period of time that I was at Babson, and I think it's only going to accelerate.
Which is interesting, because Babson is one of the best ranked MBA programs.
Yeah, it wasn't just my program, it was across the board.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Case in point, almost 50% of the Google IT certificate completers on Coursera, and Kerry works with this certificate as well, make less than $30,000 a year. So how can they possibly think about, unless there's a Pell Grant? But it's also a heavily internationalized certificate that's reaching the world. So, but maybe that Google IT certificate leads to a $60,000 a year job that eventually leads to a master's degree that then increases the earning potential of that student. So being able to stage educational opportunities for our students at the time that they need them is really important for us to be able to do.
And if I could add on
Please.
to that, we, as part of the certificate that we crafted with Coursera, we are working with Western Governors University, which is an online university that focuses on skills-based education as opposed to how long you stay in the classroom. They graduate, most of their graduates, within 2.5 to 3 years as opposed to the usual 4. And we have it so that you could either get credit, college credit for those skills, or you could go ahead and just go get a job. And I think that, again, that's the way of the future. We have to start looking at skills-based accreditation so that the cost of college may not change, but maybe you can go faster. Maybe you can actually get credit for what you're learning.
I also, if I could just add, you know, we tend to be very optimistic about any technological change and hope that it's going to make the world a better place. I hate to date myself, but I remember when email launched, you know. And, but what can we do to use technology to decrease the cost of education or societal goods? So when I was at Boulder, we designed degrees on the Coursera platform that are master's degrees in engineering that cost $20,000. So that's a third of the price of out-of-state tuition. Now, they don't get the Buffalo pool, they don't get to go to advising, but it is a reasonably costed, extremely high-quality degree that is affordable and leads to career outcomes. So also, anything that we can do to acknowledge that not all of our students need all of the services all of the time. Some of them do. But the vast majority of the world does not live in that kind of a bubble. They need education so that it has outcomes so that they can improve their lives.
In terms of reducing the cost, I wonder whether part of the cost is due to the fact that the universities here have a double role in this country. On one hand, they teach you whatever subject matter you're interested in, whether it's English or math or business or political sciences, but then there is also this huge amount of general education, which in the rest of the world is taught at the high school. And that avoids having to spend the year. So when I went to college in Milano, I only studied math because I'd done all the rest before. Is there a way that the United States can think in terms of using the high schools in a more effective way, thus reducing the number of time that kids need to be in college?
This is such a loaded question to an American audience. Why don't we do better with K through 12 education? I don't know. Gosh, you know, I think it's actually because we don't enforce standards, have standards, and enforce standards. So in Massachusetts in 1994, the Republicans and the Democrats got together and did an education reform which has firmly placed Massachusetts schools at the top of K through 12 schools throughout the nation, virtually for more than a decade. Now, maybe the last 15 years. It was a firm adherence to high standards and testing. And this is a very unpalatable kind of prescription for many people. They don't like the idea of standards. They don't like the idea of testing. It pressurizes the school environment. You get much better outcomes.
Well, I couldn't agree more. Of course, I'm negatively biased because I live in California, and our education system is not the one of Massachusetts.
I agree with Kerry. I also think that then we have to really focus on early childhood education and catching students from underprivileged populations who don't have the support at home, who don't have wraparound services like Kerry's organization provides to her learners, to really set themselves up to succeed in a highly standardized, demanding environment. But we owe it to our populations and our citizens to do that for them.
Well, I think we are coming to an end. If there is any final comment that my two panelists want to add before we call it a day?
Well, just that I'm very excited about the future of education, especially lifelong education and continuing education. And I would urge everyone here who employs anyone to think about skills as opposed to credentials. And one of the biggest problems that has driven people into the college system unnecessarily is simply that for many of the jobs that actually don't require a college education has been required simply as a sorting mechanism for a number of employers. And so if you can really put time into thinking, do I really need a college-educated person to be doing this job, or are there skills they could demonstrate in other ways so that I could give someone this opportunity? That's something that all of you could do to help solve the problem that we've been describing.
Quentin?
Hire an art history major.
Well, I want to thank our two wonderful panelists. Thank you to all of you for being here with me.